And welcome everyone to another session of Ask Professionals run by OZeWAI.org. If you don't know much about OZeWAI, we're a not-for-profit organisation in Australia. We used to run an annual conference, but now we partner with conferences instead. And we are a professional organisation, membership organisation for people to learn more about digital accessibility. We are here to help you find digital accessibility professionals, get quality training and understanding from the members that we have on our book. And we're enjoying running these events. It's been over a year now, growing each time, and we're always looking for new ideas and topics and speakers. OZeWAI also does some advocacy work. We've been doing some work around procurement, around apprenticeships, and this topic of training and courses is really quite relevant as we try and get some push into what training looks like into the education space around digital accessibility. I'm also going to do an acknowledgement now. So I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of this land on which we're meeting today. I'm meeting and pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. It would be great if you would like to put in the chat your name and your role and who you pay your respects to today if you are in Australia or in any other country who has an Indigenous culture as well that you'd like to pay respects to. I'm now going to go to each of our panelists to do an intro. I'll start quickly with myself. So I'm Bri Norton. I'm co-chair of OZeWAI with my colleague Amanda Mace, who usually does a lot of these moderations as well. And I also organise a lot of these events, working with OZeWAI to build up the membership. I'm currently doing some work with a company in Melbourne called AbilityOz, and I'm mentoring 3 people in digital accessibility, which I'm really enjoying as well. So I will now go to Gian, if you'd like to go first and do a little intro for yourself, and then I'll take it to Dax and then Russ.
Hi, thanks. My name's Gian. I've worked in the area of web accessibility since 1998. I worked on the very first accessible website in Australia. I like to joke that I started when I was 5 years old, but that's not actually true. I started my own accessibility company and developed one of the first automated accessibility testing tools in Australia. I sold that company and worked for 6 years at Monash University as the head of the Usability and Accessibility Services division. And then in 2011, I started AccessibilityOz. I spent 6 years with the W3C working on WCAG 2 back in the early 2000s. And more recently, I have been the chair of the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium Mobile Site and Native App Testing Accessibility Guidelines, which is we're trying to find a way to shorten that. If you have any ideas, let us know. Which basically we released in 2018 and again in 2020, mobile site accessibility testing guidelines and native app testing guidelines. So that's really me. I used to speak at a lot of conferences in person, and the last conference in person that I spoke at was CSUN in 2023, at which I contracted COVID. So I actually am suffering from long COVID, which means that there's not so much traveling in my future.
Yeah, and look, we're still glad to have you with us here, Gian, remotely, and having your expertise on this panel today. So Dax, please, would you like to do a little intro for us as well?
Sure. My name is Dax Castro, and I am an accessible document specialist. I've been doing this since 2016. Started working on the California High-Speed Rail project, and they walked in and said, our documents need to be accessible. Had no idea what that was, but my ADHD took over and learned a lot, and then just really laser focused on all things accessibility. Fast forward, I worked with the IAAP to help write and create the accessible document specialist test. Been published with the couple of different papers with the journal on my brain just went dead on accessible data visualizations, and that's a lot of my focus. And I run a website Facebook group called PDF Accessibility, and there's about almost 5,000 members there, and run a company called Chax Training and Consulting. And we do document accessibility training mostly with my business partner, Chad Julius. So, yeah.
Great. It's great to have you with us, Dax. And of course, you've presented to OZeWAI before when we've run our conferences. So it's good to have you back with us. And Russ, a little intro from yourself.
Hey everyone, my name's Russ, Head of Training at Intopia.
Oh, come on, you've been doing training.
Come on.
I began in around 2003, the first time I met someone who was blind, and like all of us, a really impactful experience. I've been training probably since about 2004. So yeah, long time. All of us are old, basically.
Yeah, but look, we've got that experience to do the training.
I'm only 30.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've got a daughter your age.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of these questions, right? And from those on the other call today, please put your questions in the chat, or put your hand up if you would like to prefer to ask them. Ricky's on the call today to actually help put them into where we're going to moderate these questions and go through them, so we can kind of theme them together. So please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat. We're open to anything to do with training, courses, anything about accessibility, anything that you've got a challenge in your team around training. You've got some experts here to talk to. I'm going to start with a little bit about your role and why accessibility is important to you. And I'll go back to you, Russ, because you started to touch on that anyway. You met someone and now you're involved in it. But what is your role now, and why is accessibility important in everything that you're doing there?
Yeah, so my role as head of training is to do basically two things: is to build out our training program, both our instructor-led and our platform. We have a learning platform, and then deliver training along with some of our other teammates. So yeah, that's my role. The passion, I suppose, as a lot of us, I think my biggest interest is people with lived experience. For years, I would travel around. Some of you would know a guy called Roger Hudson, who was very formative in Australia in the early days. We would actually travel to people's houses and their offices and just sit and watch people and how they interact with products. And to me, that was the most incredible experience ever, because instead of thinking about WCAG and conformance, it was about people. And so a lot of the training that we do at Intopia is trying to tell those people's stories so that people can understand the importance of accessibility from a personal perspective rather than just from a compliance perspective. But yeah, that's my passion.
No, exactly right. And mine was a similar experience with Neil King from Vision Australia. One of his first speaking events, and it was just this kind of light bulb moment for me, and got caught ever since. How about you, Dax? What's your role? I mean, you talked about your training, but why is accessibility so important to you?
Well, I think it's one of the things that we take for granted. I was sitting in a barber chair and was talking, you sit in the chair and they ask you, what do you do? And, all the common questions. And I tried to explain, I said, well, I help give people guidance on how to make things accessible. I said, like on Instagram, if I'm a blind person, how would I understand what a photo that says another wet day at the park is? It could be me with my children running through the water features, or maybe it's my dog jumping in the pond, and I said it happened that image happened to be for a dog slobbering all over a ball, but by the image description, you have no idea. He goes, I had no idea blind people watch Instagram. And that to me was just like, so telling. And so for me, I really think my passion is really user experience. WCAG's great. The rules are great. I get a lot of people who get caught up in memorizing the criteria and all of this stuff and trying to gauge whether or not something really meets a criteria. But in the end, my passion is it a good user experience? The rules help us get there. They give us a uniform way to attack something. But if you focus on that user experience and what that's like for that person, how does a table of contents sound? How does this list or this element sound to someone? For me, that I think is the passion of understanding the user impact. And so, it's a lot of why I do what I do. It's really to help bridge that gap of user experience.
Exactly right. And it's digital, right? Tech's an enabler. why we're creating barriers in this environment when it's actually going to improve someone's, optimize someone's lives. So, let's do the best we can with it. Gian, what's your current role at the moment, and why is accessibility important to you?
So I'm CEO of AccessibilityOz, and the accessibility evangelist, I guess. I I used to say I just fell into accessibility. I was working for a document, writing documentation firm who then kind of branched out into building websites in the late 90s. And we had a client called the Vision Australia Foundation that wanted, a website built for them. And we were like, why? Blind people don't use websites. And then we learned otherwise. And I always said that's where it came from. I just sort of fell into it. I was studying psychology at university. It wasn't something that I was particularly interested in. In fact, my computer science teacher at high school wanted me to go into computer science. And I said, I don't want to sit in front of a computer for the rest of my life. And that's how things ended up. But actually, probably about a decade ago, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I was watching TV after a long day at work, and this TV show called Press Gang came on, and I loved this TV show. It was on when I was like year 7, year 8, year 9, and we used to go to school the next day and talk about all the characters and blah blah. And they actually have a character who's not a main character, but is in probably 3/4 of the episodes, who is quadriplegic and uses a sit puff machine to, write articles for this newspaper. And it all sort of came flooding back to me, kind of like how I first experienced that when I was like 13, 14. And, how first off I was like, what is this character doing? Like, they just can't do anything to, them just being a regular part of the series. And then I sort of remembered how the Vision Australia thing came about, which was basically someone was said, at this company, like, who wants to take over this job, figure out how blind people use websites. And I was like, I'll do it. Like, they should use websites just like everybody else uses websites. Like, and I never understood that kind of, us versus them that a lot of people get stuck on when they first encounter accessibility. Not because I was just so special that I never encountered it, but because I had gone through that process many years before. And so it always just seemed like a natural human right that everyone with a disability should access information like anybody else. And I also felt it was kind of almost like rubbing salt into a wound to have inaccessible information and inaccessible content, because often people with disabilities, they don't have mobility available, or they don't have enough money to go travel to the bank or whatever. They're often in lower socioeconomic ranges. And, the web provides an ability for them to do things that, they wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise. And then to put a barrier in that because someone hasn't coded something properly, when it's actually not that hard. It's really not that hard. It just really kind of annoyed me. So I'm a fairly passionate person. So I can get up on my soapbox and be like, this has to be accessible, because I just don't understand why it wouldn't be. That's kind of where I came from.
No, that's great. And look, people don't wake up in the morning to exclude people, right? It's just because they don't know what they don't know. So look, I'm going to go to a question here about getting started. And it is something that, we're finding a lot, even with the team I'm on at the moment, is, where do they get started to learn about digital accessibility? So what are some of the places that you would recommend that people get started in understanding and learning accessibility? And particularly if it's not technical, other aspects as well, the content. And I'll start with you, Russ, if you'd like to share, like what kind of resources would you share with people about getting started?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing to start with would be who they are in terms of, what sort of things they do and how far along in the journey they are. So, for example, if they're a designer, you might give them different resources, a different starting point to their developer. There are some core things that we should all know. But yeah, I'd be trying to work out where they are currently and what roles they have and what they're really looking for in the future. And then sort of try to tailor some, resources and training to suit that need. In fact, one of the things we do at Intopia, I'm sure others do the same, is when you're faced with a bunch of people that are all starting a journey, we have this thing which is called a knowledge and skill assessment. So we try and establish who they are and what sort of roles they have and where they are currently, so that then you can deliver training that suits their role, but also their current understanding. So yeah, it's a real depends question, I suppose.
There's some generic training that you start with when you're onboarding with people in Intopia in your organisation or in organisations you work with? Do you kind of expect that there's a certain level of accessibility that people should know about?
Yeah, I'm sure the others will say the same, that we have some free resources that we send to people, which are very, very core basic things like what is WCAG, what is accessibility. So there's some fundamental things that we often share to people. And then we have 14 courses at Intopia, so we've pretty well got courses for every role and level. The one I like probably more than most is we do this one which is called Testing for Teams, and it literally just starts you so that anyone in the team can just learn the basics of keyboard testing and heading testing. And we often joke about that being like a gateway drug to accessibility, because it's very, very basic, but what ends up happening is people learn really core things like zooming their browser and things like that. And that can sometimes pique their interest to then dive into more specific training about their role. So yeah, there's some things that help people sort of start that journey.
No, that's great. And Dax, what about, PDF and document accessibility? Where would you suggest people get started in learning and understanding that kind of aspect of it?
So we have a document that we start with, which is 10 things you can do to improve accessibility without being an expert, which really, and I just put the link in the chat, which is just a free resource that talks about what we call born accessibility. Because as was said previously, accessibility isn't hard. When you start is what makes it difficult. If you start at the end, you've already made the document, you've already put the thing out there, and then somebody says, oh, now I've got to make it accessible. That can be just a huge lift. But if you understand things like headings and image descriptions and accessible language, inclusive language, and you build that into the document as you go, you can get a 80% accessible document straight out of Word without really knowing all of the rules and regulations and all of that. So just understanding, I think for us, we start with understanding how structure impacts a document, what headings are, what a good image description is, the basics, and get them moving on that. And really the gateway to all of that is understanding that user experience. And so typically we'll start a session by showing an accessible or inaccessible document using a screen reader. And then they all just go, wow, I had no idea. And then they're kind of hooked. They have the buy-in of, oh, well, okay, what do I do? And then we start walking them through those baby steps of, how can I learn this without getting super overwhelmed?
No, that's a really good point. And Ricky, feel free to throw in any resources that you know of, because I know Ricky's got lots, and OZeWAI has a lot as well. Anyone that has those resources, please share them in the chat. We do put this these links up on the recording. Gian, I know you're doing a lot of work in the mobile space. There's a big gap, I think, there in training and understanding of basically expertise in mobile accessibility. Where do people go to get started on that?
I don't want to toot my own horn, but the AccessibilityOz website. So this set of mobile guidelines that, I didn't write them myself. A huge group of accessibility professionals got together, and this is quite common in the accessibility industry to actually have people kind of build their own groups themselves and create their own guidelines that only then later get accepted as policy. And so I actually, was the chair. I've been the chair since 2018. As I said, we released the last guidelines in 2020, and I was forever, just because the guidelines were on the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium site, because that's where we all met and that's how the committee was created. And I kept saying, oh, change, update this because it's missing a comma or blah, blah. And eventually Chris Law, who runs that conference just said, just put it on the AccessibilityOz website. I don't have time to keep changing it. So what we do when it comes to mobile is we actually have a kind of like an introduction to mobile session, but I actually have been talking about mobile accessibility since about 2012, 2013. And I started by doing this session called Mobile Accessibility, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And it basically was just this, screenshots of terrible, terrible mobile designs. And that informed a lot of the guidelines. So that was a really good, fun kind of presentation that, people loved. And I actually have just put it up recently on our website, so it's not, buried amongst all the videos. So I can put that in the chat. So that's the 2018, which is the last time I did that particular presentation. But the actual mobile one, I mean, I run it a lot at conferences and things like that. I've put that out as well.
And actually, Gian, just on that, I think, we've talked about maybe bringing these kinds of resources into OZeWAI. So when it comes up to the next question here, how do you think OZeWAI can best support specialists in promoting kind of accessibility training for their organizations? How do you think we as a community should be doing a lot more of this in a way that we can support the specialists? What I've heard from a lot of people is that, that people come and go in an organization, they do a whole lot of training, all that training gets lost. It just, it disappears. What can organizations like OZeWAI do to kind of provide that ongoing support for organizations that maybe don't have internal expertise? Yeah, and I think that comes back to, what you're developing here in the mobile space.
Yeah, so I feel like having kind of public training would be helpful, so people could, it's a lot of money to hire, AccessibilityOz or Intopia or whoever to actually run a day of training for an organization, especially if you're a smaller organization and you only have like one accessibility person. So for a while there, I did have like public mobile training courses. Are much more popular in the US actually than in Australia. And that way you can at least, you don't have to find the 10 to 15 people to make it worthwhile. So I think that's something that OZeWAI could perhaps do, is sort of say, hey, we're going to offer this particular training, once every quarter or once every 6 months or something. And so, people who or, running companies whose staff might come and go might be, able to say, okay, well, they always do this training. The next one's in, 6 months or something like that. And it's not, a huge, $1,000 output. So I think that's, I mean, it is hard. It's really hard. Accessibility does change fairly quickly. So it can, and it can be difficult to sort of keep up with things, especially if it's not the only thing that you do. But yeah, I think that maybe that's how OZeWAI could help. Yeah.
What about you, Russ? How do you think OZeWAI and other organizations like us, that those professional organizations, providing those kind of services, what kind of things would you like to see, for accessibility specialists, maybe even, that Intopia may not be able to, provide, what's the gaps that we could be looking at? Because we've got a wide range in our membership, right? So any ideas there? Oh, I think you've gone mute.
I was just going to say, we should start your own police force and be able to go around to organizations and haul them out. Well, the very first thing you could do is just have some sort of resource which has all of this training in a single location. So if people come to you, they can see all the wonderful training programs that are available out there.
Yeah.
But you hit on something else, which is missing pieces. There's a lot of people that that fall out of those sort of standard. Like we have training for designers, developers, testers, but there's things that a lot of people struggle with, which is like almost what Dax is hinting at. Like, what if you're in an organization and you want accessibility to spun up? How do you get there? Or procurement processes or documents for your organization. They're courses that aren't really, Intopia doesn't specifically cover them as training, but they're things that people desperately need that aren't covered in sort of more rigid courses. So I think there's a lot of places that OZeWAI could really become a resource, but also fill in some of those gaps.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. What about you, Dax? Any ideas?
Well,
And
yeah,
I know
I think
there's international organizations that do something similar. So yeah, partnering with them as well.
I would think if you planned a year-long set of webinars that were an accessibility journey, right? Starting with how do you start an accessibility movement within your organization? Because sometimes that's the hardest thing. As Gian had said, sometimes you're a single person in a single department, and your job is to support an enormous amount of inflow, whether it's web or document or video or whatever. And just getting buy-in that, hey, you would never take your car to a mechanic who learned on YouTube University, right? They go take training, and then you would never go to a mechanic who's like got one tool, right? They have a whole tool chest full of things and specialized tools for brakes and for, different parts of your engine. But when it comes to document and digital accessibility in general, people are like, oh, that costs how much a month to have, or that training costs how much a month to go to. And so I think if there was if OZeWAI had a kind of a planned out journey of accessibility that was a series of webinars that built on each other, that just revolved. And maybe it's once every other month or whatever the case may be, but that it's designed to give people that overview set of information on each of the different milestones in your journey: implementing, document, web, how do you tackle 5,000 inaccessible PDFs on you, or you have a whole learning management system built on this one platform that needs accessibility considerations, because it's, and taking them through that journey, and then providing the resources from your partners, right? So having the core education and then saying, okay, if you want to know more, here's some places and resources to go.
No, that's great. And so Gian, the next question kind of follows on from that. But what are the biggest challenges for people wishing to learn more? Where there's quality, there's how do I know that I'm getting the right, understanding the right expertise? There's cost. Who can I talk to? What other challenges are there for people wanting to learn more?
Yeah, so often within an organization, it's a task or a job that's tacked onto someone else's job. Like it's something, that there's very rarely, a pure accessibility person. It might be just a usability and accessibility person, or it, might be a developer or a tester who's been given that task, or has maybe chosen, because they're a bit of an accessibility champion, to take that on. So of course the problem then is time and resources. So, if you already have a full-time job, and I can't really think of many IT jobs that don't, take a lot of time, you don't have a whole lot of time to kind of get up to speed. And you also don't have necessarily funds to go to conferences and things like that. So, I think that resources and being taken seriously can be quite difficult. There's a lot of free resources out there, but of course it is difficult to know, who you can trust. And that's where I would say you need to look at, the background of the people, the companies, how long they've been operating, et cetera, et cetera. At AccessibilityOz, we have so much free content. And, we've often have people come to us and say, oh, we had this problem, and, thanks so much. We use this document or whatever to stave off this lawsuit, and they won't have even contacted us. And that's great. So knowing who to trust is important, but I think that those kind of fly-by-nighters, or those backyard accessibility companies, that we still tend to, lose projects to occasionally. They don't last very long because they don't really understand the amount of work they're doing. So we actually have had clients who have engaged with a firm that's just started, and then come back to us 6 or 12 months later and said, oh, sorry, we didn't choose you because you were more expensive, but we actually know that what you're doing is correct. So it is difficult. There's definitely a lot of people out there that feel like accessibility is a gravy train, but it's not really. It's actually quite a complex industry. So Yeah, but it's always difficult because the clients don't necessarily, understand what makes an accessibility specialist and what makes, someone who's just on it.
And maybe that's somewhere that OZeWAI can come in as well, like provide some of those kind of guidance around, what is that, what does that quality look like for those looking for accessibility specialists. But Dax, with this kind of question around the biggest challenges for people wishing to learn more, I know you've got this Facebook group, and there's lots of other groups out there on LinkedIn. There's an Ali Slack channel. It's a very, very popular one that you can ask questions on. What are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing for people who want to learn more?
They jump in and they're just overwhelmed. That you don't know what you don't know. And when you think document accessibility is running the Microsoft checker, and then you are opened up to the world of what it is to actually be compliant, it is a whole new animal. And I think people just don't understand the volume of what there is to know.
Yeah.
But what we tell people, and Meryl Evans says this all the time, progress over perfection, that you can learn some basic things and get a document with no significant barriers, where you've got heading structure, image descriptions, and tables that are reasonably accessible, and you're most of the way there. And so I think that what people struggle with is they jump into this trying to write their thesis first before they really even do the outline. And so we get a lot of basic questions. And the Facebook group is really nice, because it used to be just Chad and I, or it used to be just me answering most of the questions. And now we've got 30 or 40 people that I would trust that if they gave an answer, that it's pretty close to the right answer. I still manage the answers just because that's just me. But for the most part, what it boils down to is asking questions, doing research, and understanding the user experience. And if you do those things, then I think you're setting yourself up for a pretty good, successful outcome. But it's when you don't ask and you spend 4 hours struggling to try to make something accessible that I can tell you how to do in 2 seconds, or you don't understand what the user experience is and you haven't really researched it, and you put something like a navigation bar in the top of your PDF on every single page. It's those types of things that once you know the resources are out there to help you, is taking advantage of those resources to help you along the way.
No, exactly right. And things like documents, there's, you need to understand what's the format for the document, what's the audience. And then you can understand, so is it going to be printed? Well, then, you look at it a different way to something that's a digital version. So that kind of thing. What about you, Russ? What do you think are some of the biggest challenges at the moment for people learning about or learning more about digital accessibility?
Yeah, just put some in chat, because it's great hearing the others, because then you can sort of put the pieces together.
Yeah.
But I think what a lot of people say here is the first one is just that, which are the best resources. The thing that Dax said, which is so true, which is where to start. There's that parallel, like where do I go? Then there's obvious things like Gian's mentioned, like money. But another one is just having time. And that could be as a person, but also from the organization. Sometimes they won't give you time. The other thing people don't talk about is commitment. A lot of people start out really wanting to do it, but they don't finish it. We have a learning platform and we get to see the stats. A lot of people buy our training, and it's a great training, but some people just don't finish the training. That's some reasons why we both run face-to-face and online, because some people just find it hard to commit. But to me, the one that is probably the most fascinating is just that people need different ways of learning. As an example, being someone who's dyslexic, I will not sit there and read a document, but I'll watch a video, whereas one of my colleagues would rather throw their computer out the window than watch a video. So everyone's vastly different. So not only do you have to find resources, but you've got to find it delivered in a way that suits your need. And I'm sure both our other wonderful trainers here would say the same. We try and make sure that our material is delivered in all sorts of ways. So all of our training has videos and text and quizzes and activities. But sometimes you go to material and if it's not delivered in a way that you can grab onto, then it's wasted as well. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges out there.
Yeah, Dax, do you want to add to that?
To follow up, so we have been in many, many trainings where it is literally just the icons. Like our basic training is either our training offerings are 3-hour or 6-hour classes, and my camera would be the only thing on for 3 hours. Everybody else is just icons. and no one's talking in chat. And so I find it's the thing probably no one wants to talk about is everybody wants to do accessibility, but not everybody wants to spend the time to learn accessibility. And so they feel like, oh, I can just watch the video or be present in the training and I'll learn it. And in fact, we've got a client right now. They spent 6 figures on training. And we are having to go back and do additional training because the people who took the initial forms class went, oh, well, we understand it's really a thing now that we've done the 3-hour training. Can you do something that's like more comprehensive? And we're like, the 3-hour training we just gave you is like everything there is to you need to know. We should, and so we ended up doing more training because now they're going to be required to turn on their camera. They're going to be required to participate. They're going to be required to do handouts because really the delivery is only half the battle. And as Russ has said, that it is really about some people need different learning experiences, video versus exercises versus kind of hand holding or interactive conversation or text. All of that is how do I learn best? And that's a challenge as instructors that we face daily.
And I think that's where, OZeWAI, we've been talking about the apprenticeships. They've got them in the UK now. They're starting to do it in the US. And we're kind of investigating how we can actually bring that into Australia, because it's also knowing who you can talk to. So practical on the job, how do I actually implement this? At the stage, you can do all that training as much as you can, and if you go back to your job, you go, oh, I can't remember what to do now, without that kind of support and mentorship. And Gian, you've got something to add to that as well?
Yeah, so absolutely, the multiple ways thing is really interesting, because that's how we've done our training. And it comes back to kind of, you can't please everyone, because our training is basically you read a fact sheet. And then, I explain it going through all the same things that are really in the fact sheet. And then you watch a video, and we'll always get complaints that you're repeating the same content. And it's like, yes, because, there are some people who require different, learning styles. And so it is really important that you have those multiple ways. And I do also feel like, we get great feedback, but sometimes you can't please everyone, and there will be people in a room that are smarter than other people in the room, and you have to cater for everybody, and it's important that everybody picks this stuff up. So I think that's really important. And one thing that Dax said, I just wanted to comment on, which was like perfection, and there's a quote that's perfectionism is the opposite of good. And I've actually sort of changed that slightly, or maybe I heard it from someone else, which is perfectionism is the opposite of done. I actually find that if I'm perfect, and other people are like this too, you have to be perfect about something, it never actually gets done. And maybe I think that knowing 80% is good enough. And there is this real fear around accessibility that, you could do something wrong. And, I just think that sometimes that stops people even trying in the first place, because they're afraid. They're going to say disabled people instead of people with disabilities. And in the long run, people with disabilities don't really care. 20% accessible is better than 0% accessible. And so you just, try and do what you can.
Yeah, it's little steps as well. And look, I think, going on from that question, and the types of challenges and training options and types, I think that's a really good point. So what are you seeing, Russ, in the trends of accessibility training? What kind of trends are you seeing? What's kind of improving the way training is happening? And we had a design discussion last month. And there's so much more training out there now. It's wonderful, right? It's on all the different platforms. LinkedIn's doing it. Everyone's got some wonderful training. What are the trends that you're seeing that you quite like, and that you'd like to share with other people?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and I'm sure the others would agree with this, one of the things that's been really sad to observe over the years is that our roles have become more abstract. So designers used to be, when I was young, a wee lad of 60 back in the old days, we did everything. So you were a designer and a front-end developer. And there was there were front-end developers and there were true developers. But what's ended up happening is designers have shifted more and more abstractly out into, either Sketch or Figma, etc., and they're very removed from HTML. And engineers have moved away from front end into massive frameworks where they're both so abstracted from reality that I'm kind of shocked every now and then to realize that there are designers who fundamentally don't know what HTML is, don't understand what an element is. And when they look at things like a radio group or, a series of buttons they don't understand, it's a checkbox group or something very basic like that. And engineers who've gone so far away that they don't even, understand basic HTML anymore. So we're seeing this widening gap, and I'm getting to a positive place in a second, but this widening gap. The positive that I'm seeing is that gap has caused accessibility always falls into those gaps, by the way. So if you've got designers who do something in Figma and they throw it over the fence to developers, and developers or engineers just, randomly choose heading levels, that's something that's fallen in those gaps. Or one of my favorite ones that falls in that gap is focus management. It's the core of how stories travel through, how users travel through a site. Focus management is everything, but that's often falling in the gaps. It's a design problem, but developers end up sort of having to solve that. So the positive is that I'm starting to see people realize that they need to come back together, and accessibility training, weirdly enough, can be a catalyst for change. For example, we do this thing on annotations for Figma, and it actually is not an accessibility problem, but accessibility has become the tool that helps them have those discussions, because suddenly we're using accessibility to start saying you need to be communicating better. And heading levels and things like that are great, and where the live region, all those sort of things are really important, not to over annotate. But suddenly it brings up these questions like, whose responsibility is it? Like a classic example would be, who is responsible when that form gets submitted an error message? Where does focus go? Who makes that decision? And where's that communicated? And weirdly enough, accessibility and things like annotation discussions can begin those sort of broader discussions to close off some of those gaps. So
no, that's a really good point. What about you, Dax? What kind of trends are you seeing in accessibility training? It's a great example though with the gap.
I plus 100 for what Russ said. I mean, absolutely. But I will say, in the same vein, document accessibility focuses you on the content. Why did I put this chart or graph in here? What am I really trying to say? One of the organizations we're working with right now has been sued twice for insufficient alt text, and they have thousands and thousands and thousands of documents. And now their alt text is this long. I mean, it's literally 1,300 to 1,500 characters. And so, trying to sway that needle back the other way is a bit of a thing. But to answer your question directly, what are the trends that we're seeing? We're seeing a follow-up homework as a trend in our most recent last 6 months to a year, where we've moved away from just doing training, come in, do our training and leave. Now we do training, we give homework, we leave for a week, we come back and we sit down and go over the homework and go, how did you do? And what we found out initially in our first few text cases were 50% of the people would do the homework and the others would show up thinking they could just learn by osmosis. And so we've now prepped our clients to say, hey, look, you're paying for this training. You need to make it mandatory that these people do the homework, because you're going to get the most out of it when they do the homework. And so what we're finding is it's been wildly well received, and people are feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like I can do this now. I heard you talking, I heard you say it, and I could see the buttons and see the things I needed to do. But once I did the homework and had to struggle a bit, knowing you were there to come back to, it really made the difference in how well that training was received. And we think that's a trend we're going to keep moving forward, of the aftercare, the homework, and then the revisiting.
That's a really good point. And it comes down to kind of the inclusivity of how we think about accessibility in training itself. Because we'll probably have in our accessibility communities more people with lived experience who want to learn about digital accessibility. They will also want to learn in different ways, right? So they want asynchronous to put instead of the synchronous type of approach. They want to get feedback, ongoing feedback. They want mentorship. All that kind of stuff is going to be really important. And I think what we can learn in our trends for accessibility training maybe some of these HR organizations can bring them into some of the other training that's quite boring and mundane as well, and people don't take any notice of, like cybersecurity or anything like that. So maybe those trends will actually go into other training. So hopefully that's a good thing. What about you, Gian? What are you seeing as training trends in accessibility training?
So first thing, we tried the homework and we could not get people to do it. We just could not. It just, every single time they were like, oh, we were going to, and we got pulled into such and such. And so I actually just ended up giving the homework and then going through it, afterwards in the next session, and sort of like, going through everything together as a team. One of the big things that I think training is obviously moving online a lot in a way that it never did before. And one of the most important things that I can say to make training actually work online is to actually make everyone turn on their videos. And it's just to, it's okay if people, jump in and out, and like maybe check emails and things like that, but you need people to be engaged, and creating that kind of engagement in an online system is difficult. So that's kind of how I sort of see things moving. And I do think, the homework is really the way to get. And I also see that one of the things we've done is we used to do a full week of training, 5 days of training, very full on. And now we do 1 day a week over a 5-week period. So that's something that's changed. And also I just want to reiterate what Russ said about the frameworks. Frameworks, I feel like, are my nemesis. But basically, like Russ, I've been doing training since the early 2000s. And, we got to a point, I think maybe like 2010, where we'd get developers come into training courses and we'd teach them about row headers and column headers and alt attributes and images and things like that. And they'd be like, yeah, we know this. What are you, they'd walk away going, we already know all this stuff. Like, what are you, you're not teaching us anything we don't already know. And then the frameworks came in, and then all of a sudden you are getting like really, developers building really complex systems that have no idea what a TD or a TH element is. They have no idea what an input is. They have no idea what a label is. They put ARIA described by on images. And so our work has become, exponentially harder because we are just dealing with people. We have to start and we literally have to say, this is what an element is to developers. So there was a period in 2010 that was like, oh, I guess, accessibility training, it's over. But now it's so much harder. It really, really is so much harder. And the other trend I've seen is a kind of mix and match kind of thing where you'll have a client say, oh, look, we've got like 4 testers and 3 designers and 5 developers, and we want 1 day of training. And that just never works very well, because at the end of it, you get the designers going, I didn't understand 3/4 of that. The developers saying, I didn't understand half of that. The designers saying, I didn't really, that kind of makes sense. And no one's happy. It's really important, I think, to train to the what the person is doing, but that's not where what people want. They want like a 1 day training. Okay, that's it. We don't need to think about accessibility at all anymore because everyone's trained up, and it just doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work. You're right. Look, we've got a couple of questions in the chat as well, and thank you. This discussion's been great. Now we're over halfway through. But everyone else on the call, feel free to take a break and stretch and get some water or coffee if you're listening in as well at the same time. Hopefully the speakers, you're still okay to keep going. It's been a great discussion so far. Excellent. I'm going to go with one of these first questions because it's kind of related in that kind of the frameworks that are happening. And I love there's effects there. Russ, you will have to explain that to a couple of the people who obviously are on the call, like Andrew Downey, who cannot see the effects. But Russ has got some effects going on behind him, Andrew, that you would no, you don't want to explain it to Andrew. Okay.
I'll talk to Andrew afterwards.
Okay, exactly. So there's a comment here about the main challenge that this person faces in their work is the uptake to making accessibility a central aspect of how we approach content and service design. And I think, again, that's those gaps that, it's falling down. especially when it comes to essential services. I'm here to understand what skills and training I can look into and gain to help make accessibility central to the work I do in content and service design. And I think, is there something there that you could actually help this person with, and like how to help make it central? I mean, things like, bringing people together to talk about it, find out the champions, all those kinds of things. Any ideas, Gian? Would you like to answer that one? Yep.
So I completely understand. And so often we get brought into a client where there's one person that's for some reason found some money, and so they've gone, look, we've got $10,000, we've got $5,000, whatever, to do accessibility, and no one else cares about it, but I just need to convince people. And so one of the big things I'm just looking it up now is, and we just decided to make it publicly available, is this accessibility basics seminar. And I've been running this for 25 years. It has changed over the 25 years, but basically it covers the same thing. Like, what is online accessibility? What is, why is it important? The types of disabilities, showing a screen reader, of course, accessibility in the law and web content accessibility guidelines, and then some examples. And this is a really good way of getting people, interested in accessibility. And there's a lot of people who walk away from that going, oh, I get it now. It's like really important, because, you're right, Bri, people don't wake up and say, hey, I want to exclude a whole bunch of people today. It was something that we charged a lot of money for. And I just thought, after about a couple of years ago, I thought, you know what, I'm going to make it available to everybody. And I think that, and that has really, brought a lot of people on board. In fact, I didn't realize this, but in 2019, Jerry Gaffney, who runs the accessibility at ABC, he and I were up for the same award, which was Accessibility Person of the Year, and I won it. But he's absolutely brilliant, and so we're sitting at the awards ceremony, and he said, you don't really remember me, and I've met Jerry lots of times, but sorry, who did I say it was? Jerry Newstadel. Jerry Newstadel? Yeah, sorry, having a moment. It's a long COVID moment for you. Jerry Newstadel. And I said, yeah, no, I don't, and he said, well, you came to this, you did this work for Office of Environment and Heritage in New South Wales in like 2008. And you did this accessibility basics seminar. And I decided right then and there that I would be an accessibility specialist. And, so many people, not so many people, have come up and said, this is when I decided. And it's funny because they never actually contact me and say, hey, I'd like to work for you. I just find out years later. It's like, if you get excited about accessibility, come talk to me. But, that is a way of really getting people on board. Sorry?
To be as quiet.
That's all right. There's someone's just going to mute them.
Okay. So that's a way of really making people understand that it's important that there are actually people involved, that you're actually helping people, and it's also not that hard. And for developers, sometimes, they look at it and go, maybe Russ, this is why you did it, but it's kind of cool. It's cool to kind of figure out how you do these things and make them accessible. That's would be my recommendation.
What about you, Russ? How does this person kind of help make accessibility central to the work in their organization?
Good question. I'm going to dob Andrew Downey, and who's on the call with me here, because I've dragged Andrew to sessions before. I love everything that Gian's saying. I've taken a different tack over the last 6 or 7 years, which is whenever I go to start a new organization like banks or insurance, I would bring people with disabilities in to meet them. And to me, that's life-changing for everyone involved. So I've dragged Andrew to many, many sessions at banks and insurance companies. There's a good friend of mine called Judith who has cerebral palsy. I bring her along and basically get to chat to people and understand things that frustrate them and things that would make their life easier. And to me, that it has an impact right across. No, you've always been fantastic, Andrew. But it's so powerful and impactful because you're talking about people, again, talking about people rather than criteria. And it also has an impact on executives too. So to me, that has an impact right across the organization. The other thing that I found interesting about that is the language changes when you talk afterwards.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is I would find that if I'd bring Andrew in and everyone would be really excited to meet Andrew, he'd have great insights. When Andrew left, after that, if I was talking about a problem, instead of talking about WCAG 4.1.6 or whatever the hell it is, I would say, Andrew, that would be hard for Andrew. The conversations became incredibly different then because you're now talking about people rather than criteria. So to me, one of the best things you can ever do is to invite people along and understand their lived experience and the ripples it has out through the organization. I found to be fantastic.
It's the story. I totally agree. It's the stories, and we bring those into the inclusive research workshops that Andrew is a part of as well. There's nothing like having that kind of evidence base and understanding from people that are experienced it, and having someone get that light bulb moment that said, I really am not making this a good experience for that person. So, what about you, Dax? What kind of advice would you give to this person to help make their accessibility central to the work they're doing?
Well, I really think it is about that human connection. And I applaud and +1 to everything that Gian and Russ have said, that, it is about finding that human connection. There are many people at PDF UA, that the PDF Association, that say the tags tree is the only thing that matters in a PDF document, that it's just the tags. And I was approached on LinkedIn by a person who said, hey, I'm reading all these documents and my cursor is going all over the place. The reading order is all wrong. And when I contact them, they say it passes accessibility. We passed our checker. It's all good to go. And what I said, well, send me some of these documents. And when I found out in every one of the instances, they had set the tag order, but not the reading order. And so for older technology, she has a traumatic brain injury. And so she doesn't use JAWS or NVDA. That's not a comfortable tool for her. So she uses Speechify. And Speechify is an older tool that relies on the reading order, this construction order. Yeah. And so if you don't set both areas, you're not reaching a certain portion of your community. Yeah. And so PDF A says only the tag tree matters. And here I have this person telling me the documents are still inaccessible. So we brought her on our podcast and we had her explain her experiences. And I got I won't say a flood of emails, but I normally get 1 email or 2 emails a month about something on our podcast. But I got 7 emails and they all had said, I had no idea that this was an actual thing. I thought it was just a soapbox people were standing on. I'm like, look, there are people that are affected by this, and understanding that there is a personal component. Personas are great. We can put a slide deck together and put a persona on there and say, John, whoever is this person and this is their ability and all of that. But it's another thing when you have a person who's impacted by the decisions that you choose to make or not make in your documents. Exactly. And when you only go so far, you're going to exclude some people. And then it's a matter of asking, am I willing to live with that risk? And if you ask a worker at an organization, am I willing to live with the risk? They probably say, yeah, whatever. You ask a CEO, he's going to say, wow, I want to minimize as much risk as I can. So It starts, you get a different answer the farther up the food chain you go. So I think I echo the comment that it is about making that human connection, understanding that experience, and then equating that to risk and saying, okay, now that I know, am I willing to live with that risk?
Exactly right. No, that's good. And Gian, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I just want to say this is actually something that Russ and I have kind of argued about over the years. But basically, I do just want to say that the whole point of WCAG was that you didn't need to actually engage people with disabilities. It was supposed to be a list of, these are the things that you follow. You don't actually ever need to test with a screen reader or someone who has a disability, because we know if you follow these things, then it will be accessible to everyone. And there's so many different groups of people with disabilities and interactions with those disabilities that you can't show, all of that. So you run the risk, and absolutely bringing people on board, absolutely essential. But you run the risk of saying, well, we just want to make sure this is screen reader accessible. And it's like, no, actually the largest group of people with disabilities who use the web are people with cognitive disabilities. So you need to be really careful of kind of, yes, it's a great way of bringing people on board. But then I've had clients say, oh, well, we downloaded NVDA and JAWS and it's fine and we don't need you anymore. And it's like, well, no, we do more than that. So that's just something that I just want to, and sorry, when I say that Russ and I have argued about this, I mean the importance, where the importance lies, WCAG versus user. Not that I'm sure he agrees with most of what I just said.
I disagree with everything you said.
Yeah. But I've always come from it's weird actually, because I'm not the developer. Russ is the developer. I come from a very technical standpoint. I come from a very WCAG are the rules. And then, maybe we find weird, iterations of things that don't work when we test with users, and we will address them as well. But WCAG are the rules. But having said that, in my life, I have been very much informed by what users have told me. So, for example, there's a requirement in AA, WCAG 2, that says that all errors should have suggestions. So, for example, if you have a field that is, say, first name field, and that person doesn't fill it out, you can't just say, make sure you put content in the first name. You also need to say, make sure you put content in the first name field, in, for example, John, or for example, Jane. And I always said to clients, look, for a newsletter submission form or something, you don't really need to worry about that. And then I talked to someone who has dyslexia and ADHD, and they said, that is so important for me because I skip over things and I need that. I can't fill out a form with that information. Yeah. And so all of a sudden I was like, you know what? Yes, you do need that for that 3-field form. You do need to include those things. So I do feel like WCAG is the rules, and then you add on to that with the user information.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
To follow up just quickly with that, as a person, so my specialty is accessible design, right? So when you're doing charts, graphs, and infographics, if you write alt text, you've satisfied it for a screen reader. But that's only a very small portion of the user group, right? 12 million people who are blind or low vision, only 1 million are actually blind. The rest are low vision. You have people with colorblind barriers. It's 8% of males, right? And 2% of females, and a varying degree within that. But colorblindness is a huge impact on data visualizations. And so we've encountered many organizations, they're like, well, we don't do colorblind stuff. We just add alt text because we know they can just use a screen reader. And I'm like, so you're telling me that of the 10 people on your board, statistically, one of them is colorblind. They're using a screen reader to read your reports. And how are they understanding what color is? And their answer is, well, no, but, and then we start having that conversation. So while I say screen reader, testing with a screen reader, all of that, I'm very much in the camp of it is so much more than blind people and NVDA and JAWS when it comes to accessibility. So,
and look, this is a great segue into this. The next question that's come in. Where do you draw the line between things you must learn and know? And I think there's an aspect here of like the basics, and knowing where to look things up. So, where do you draw the line? So who wants to answer that one first? Russ, do you want to have a go?
Oh, God. Well, we're living in a world of, does anyone know what I mean by Stack Overflow developers? Has anyone heard that term before? I mean, you're all probably too young. Stack Overflow was around a while ago before AI took over. But there were developers who were, who held very little in their heads, but were brilliant at searching for things on Stack Overflow. That's a skill in itself. You don't have to store everything in your brain. You have to be good at finding it in whatever form you want.
Yes.
And part of that is not only being able to write great search queries, but also determine whether that resource is a viable resource. That is an enormous skill in itself. So you don't have to store everything in your brain. I store very little, as you can all tell on this call. Almost all of it's left since breakfast, especially the alcohol I consumed before lunch. But, we don't have to store it all. What we need to be able to do is to be able to understand how to think of the question and then query that out there, and then be able to determine whether that resource is valuable. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that would be great to know. I mean, we've talked about absolute basics, like Andrew earlier up said structure. I come from a world of HTML. Structure is everything. If you understand that,
Yeah.
that should be a no-brainer. But if you don't deeply understand some of the things like ARIA controls or ARIA, what's the other one? Owns, or those sort of things, these sort of things that might be on your edge of your perspective. There's great resources like the Mozilla Developers Network. You can go and find these resources. So to me, it's, there's things you should know, but there's a lot, as long as you know how to search for things well, I'm cool with that. I'm hoping one of the others will disagree with me strongly here.
So Dax, so Gian, you want to go first? There we go.
I don't disagree with you strongly.
Oh,
What I like, people seem to think that they have reached the epitome of accessibility knowledge if they can tell you the success criterion number for a particular requirement. Like, and they, what's your favorite success criterion? 1.3.1, it's info and relationships and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, actually, I don't know them off by heart. I don't. And I occasionally do go back. Yeah. And I look at them, and the whole point of WCAG 2 versus WCAG 1, which was a very short, small document that everyone thought was really confusing and complicated, and then WCAG 2 came along and they rethought that thought. But there's everything in WCAG 2 has a, understanding this success criterion, or what is the underlying impact. So the whole point was, WCAG 2 doesn't really care how you actually meet a particular success criterion, as long as the kind of the thought, I've forgotten the word, of it is met. The intent is met. So there is an intent of the success criterion. And so sometimes, well, this morning I had a meeting with a community college, and I was going through a VPAT with someone, and they had this comment, and I thought, that's nothing to do with this success criterion. So I looked up the success criterion. I was like, yeah, that has nothing to do with that success criterion. So I don't feel that you need to have these things in your head, but Russ is right. You need to know where to look. Yeah. And the W3C has a lot of information, but so does WebAIM. So does IAP, so does OZeWAI, etc. But yeah, knowing the right places to look. And that's the important thing.
Excellent. And Dax, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, so I definitely, so I always teach that WCAG is the what to do, and then PDF UA is the how to do it. So I walk through people in our class. We go to the W3C site and we look at, here are the rules. Okay, how do I meet this rule, and how do I dissect all this information that's on this page? Because as Russ said, I 100% agree with you that it is about problem solving. If you teach problem solving, you can figure out anything. I am a father of 8 kids, and they hated going to the store with me because it was always an exercise of decision. Okay, we're going to buy some cheese, figure out the best price, figure out the best volume. Is it a block? Is it shredded? Is it this or that? Because I was trying to teach them problem solving skills. And one of the things that I really have to check myself when I'm in a group environment, in a class, or on the Facebook group, is not being too critical about people not finding things out for themselves. They're always willing to ask and say, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I'm just like, how do I know any more than you know? What made me different? I sat down and did it. I sat down and opened up the screen reader, looked at the code, looked at the regulations, figured out which solution was good, better, best, and went through it all. That's the only difference. I did the work. And so you can do that work too. You just have to be willing to do it. And I think we've really, I think over the years and decades probably, have become a spoon-fed society where we go, ChatGPT is a prime example of that, right? But I use ChatGPT to suss out some very complex stuff because I don't want to be able to have to do flow diagrams of water pressure for my koi pond in my head. I can ask ChatGPT to do it, right? But when it comes to accessibility, we need to be able to problem solve and understanding the intent of the criteria. So many people say, oh, well, what's the minimum font size? WCAG says I have to have this size and that size and this size. And I'm like, no, that is not what it says. It says you must be able to let the user control space this way or space that way or text height or that. It doesn't say the font has to be this. So I think there is some interpretation that can happen. But, you know, like I held up in my thing, I know you can't see this because of the glare, but this is a cheat sheet, WCAG in plain English. I wrote this, but I keep it on my desk because when I'm working, sometimes I need a refresher of, oh, what was meaningful sequence or sensory characteristics 1.3.3, right? And understanding that. So we all need a little help. We just have to be willing to do the research.
And I think even as us as experts, you know, in the professional environment, you know, the idea is that be open to you're always learning. You know, there's new technology coming out there. We're always learning ourselves. If you think that you have learned everything, then that's not going to be, that's not going to work for you, because in the accessibility space, you're always learning. I learn something new every day. Since we've been doing the inclusive research aspects of things, I've learned so much more about, you know, cognitive aspects of sites, impacts on, you know, with different fonts, and knowing, you know, doing that research to find out, well, you know, what are those sources? Don't just go with one. There's a lot of people that will have their opinions. And the idea is to kind of, you know, gather the people that you think that you can talk to and use the groups that are out there and mentorships and the contacts and communities like OZeWAI to get that feedback. Russ, did you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, it was just something Florian mentioned up above, but I think it's such a great point that some people may have missed in the chat, which is you don't know what you don't know, or that idea. Exactly. One very sad little story for you all. I've been used to travel around Australia for years teaching HTML and CSS, and I would ask people their knowledge level at the beginning of the day. This is going to sound very sad, but I found a trend which was most men would overstate their knowledge and most women would understate it. And by the end of each day of training, I suddenly realized that a lot of men were very arrogantly believed they fully understood the topic. One of the first things we have to have is sort of you know, be aware that we may not know everything about the topic. And so the arrogance, I think, comes into this, and self-awareness. So yeah, it's a really good point that often gets missed. If you cockily think that you know accessibility deeply, as other people have said in there, that it's a very dangerous thing. So yeah, love that comment. Thanks, Florian.
Excellent. Look, we're down to the final 15 minutes. It's just gone so fast. I'm going to go to one of the last comments that we've got here, the questions that we've got here. It's something around the AI and basically ChatGPT that you've touched on, Dax. Do you see a role for using AI in accessibility training? And maybe, Dax, did you want to start with that? Yeah,
I will tell you that 4.0 is leaps and bounds ahead of where 3 was. I've used... So I've had people take images of tables in their PDF document. All I have to do is upload the screenshot to ChatGPT and say, hey, generate a table for me for this. And it will literally read all the text, do all the OCR, put all my headings in, all my THs and TDs, and then I can export that to Excel, then back into whatever program I'm needed to go into instantly. I've had it. I've been given it bar charts and line graphs and said, generate the table for this, the equivalent table for this. And it's done a phenomenal job. I've had it do some alt text. I'm still not in that camp of allowing it to do unchecked alt text, but definitely a lot farther along. It'll give me a really good start, and maybe it analyzes a trend I didn't see as a person not familiar with the subject. Maybe it's financial, and I didn't realize this kind of trend that it identified. And then you go back and massage it a bit. So I really feel like AI, it's just like the checkers. It is about manual testing and automated tools. You use the automated tools to the best of their capability, and then you apply your manual brain to it and make it happen. But I use it all the time and save tons and tons of time. And I guess in its way, AI is it's the term AI. It's not necessarily correct. It's actually just very fast search. What's already on the internet, right? So, Russ, what do you think? You know, what's kind of what do you see the role of using AI in accessibility training? Do you use it already?
Well, I'm going to be contentious here because this has been a little bit quiet, and I'm hoping to anger everyone on the call here. I'm just going to say this: alt attributes are dead. We don't need them anymore. Just stop doing it at all, because very soon, right now, screen readers can just go, NVDA is built in, and they'll just go, give me the full description of that image. So right here and right now, I'm just saying, don't need to worry about accessibility at all.
Controversy
AI will just
already.
solve it all.
Oh,
So there you
Better
go.
not be talking about PDF documents. The
Oh,
AI engine
AI will
inside
do
a
that
PDF
too.
is garbage.
it'll fix it.
It is
Yeah.
garbage.
I use AI for everything. Even like, how do I connect with my children? Give me a conversation starter.
Yeah.
And I don't even have to say, what's the name of my children again? So yes, AI can solve everything in your life, including accessibility. There we go.
There we go.
Over to you, Gian.
There's
There you
something for
go.
everyone to take away. And yes, it's always wonderful to have Russ and his commentary on these kinds of events, these kind of sessions. Gian, how do you see it working?
I'm kind of a bit of a latecomer to the whole AI thing. I was a bit of a latecomer to the whole ARIA thing as well. I do what works for me. I think that it's something that we're looking at it a lot in terms of our automated accessibility testing tool, but we haven't looked at it in terms of training, with the exception of when we do word training. We always say, do not use the generate a description for me. We just don't ever use that because that does not work. Yeah.
Are you agreeing with that, Russ?
Oh, sorry. No, I totally disagree.
We teach people how to turn that off in Word. You go into the accessibility options. There's a checkbox that you can uncheck for automatically generate or suggest alt text. So the first thing we teach is go in, turn this off, never turn it on again, and continue life with bliss.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you. I didn't know that. Thank you, Dax.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move on to another couple of hopefully final questions. So, Russ, teams, how can they maintain a good quality of accessibility training and understanding as people move on from the organisation? What kind of things can they do internally?
Is that for the organization or for the individual?
Oh, for the individual or for the teams or the organisation, basically so they don't lose the knowledge.
That's a really good question. Oh, actually, I should just say before, I've been saying a lot about WCAG. I should just say, I'll get off the call and be stabbed to death by my team. I should say that a lot of people in Intopia are deeply, deeply embedded in WCAG, and their whole job is auditing websites all day. They live in that world. I'm a trainer. My job is to tell stories and engage with people. So if you're getting a strange opinion of Intopia, that's just me. How do you maintain it? It's a very hard question. I used to work with design system people who had to talk about loss of knowledge in design teams. It's the same sort of problem that they build up all this knowledge and then it leaves with individuals. Like anything, central locations, storing information, maintaining ongoing training so people are aware of it, things like that, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. It's a hard one. I'd love to see the other expert. I'm not the expert. Other people. What do you both think?
Of course you are, Dax. What do you think? What do you think is some good quality training internal?
Well, so first of all, I wrote three words on the chat: engagement, discussion, and reinforcement. It really is about those three things. And the best way to learn is to teach. If you want to keep yourself sharp, teach a subject. So if you're an organization and you've got the bandwidth, you have a lunch and learn every month or every week or every whatever your schedule can give you, and you assign one person to teach a small topic, or maybe it's just how to do alt text for a pie graph, or how to I don't know enough about the HTML end of the world, but how to use ARIA in I don't know, a specific situation, right? A very micro learning thing that is a small piece. You just keep people talking. And the more that it stays in the forefront, you get on these discussions where, saw the podcast, Chad and I, we have a podcast called Chax Chat. And that's how the podcast started. Chad and I would have these discussions. And one day I went, this is gold. People would love to hear this. And he's like, really? Like, yeah. And so we started the podcast. But I think at an organizational level, if you keep these conversations happening, you're going to find something's going to spark, and you're going to find some new way to do something, or some new way to overcome a time barrier or a time suck that's happening within that organization. And it's having that conversation. It's when we bury accessibility and say, oh, number 25 on the checklist is making sure it's accessible. Or, it's the one thing we talk about once a year about our commitment to accessibility as an organization. And, it's that level that it just becomes this word we say and not really integral to what we're doing.
No, it's a good point. And it comes back to even some of that main challenge that, help accessibility be central, even those brown bag lunches. Maybe you'll invite some, external community, to come and talk to some of the management. Maybe some of them are users that have been using your site or using your product. And maybe you'd like to have demonstrations of them using their assistive tech or, some of the tools that they use on their site, demonstrating that through videos, through your user research. So there's lots of things you can do through those kind of education processes. It all comes back to people again in the end, doesn't it? So what about you, Gian? What do you think, could maintain good quality training in an organization?
Yeah, so documentation, recording of videos. So when we have a new person join us, we actually give them, videos to watch for a week of all the training that we've done before around testing and things like that. But also, what Dax said, I really, really have to reiterate with the mobile guidelines. I'm always saying, hey, come join the mobile committee. And people go, oh, I don't know enough about mobile accessibility, or I don't know enough about accessibility. And I said, well, this is your opportunity to learn. I didn't know very much about mobile accessibility before I started. We would have meetings where we'd say, well, I don't even know, none of us on the call even know how to turn on a switch for a mobile device. And so we'd go find someone who had that information, or, what does this particular feature do? And someone would have homework to go investigate that and then bring it back to the team. So that is, the best way to learn is to kind of jump in the deep end and sort of have to do that kind of research yourself. But yes, it is very hard to sort of keep that training knowledge within an organization. But I think that if you can, have some kind of process that everyone goes through, it's always the same thing. So for us, it's like watching the accessibility basics seminar, doing the 1-day developer training, doing the 1-day content author training, doing the 5 days test training, etc. Then we know that at the end of that process, they have a certain level of knowledge. So, having at least it mapped out can be useful.
No, it's a good point. So, to finish up, we've got another 5 minutes left. And I'm going to mention a couple of future things that OZeWAI is up to at the end of this. So I just one more question at the end. How do you feel accessibility training has changed over the last, 25 years, or the time since we've all been, involved? Russ, what do you think? What do you think the biggest change has been? You're mute again, I think.
You'd think I'd learn. As Gian said before, COVID changed everything. So I used to do a lot of face-to-face, and so now everything's online. But I think it's changed in lots of ways. The engagement models, we have access to, like, at Intopia, we have this basic rule, which you shouldn't be talking for more than 5 minutes without doing something. So it should be an activity, a quiz, a conversation, a breakout room. All these things weren't available before. The fact that you can use FigJam or Canva or Miro to go and do breakout room activities with designers on topics, there's so many more collaborative tools available now that just weren't available before. So yeah, it's changed the whole landscape. And the fact that people can dial in from anywhere in the world and take part in training, go into breakout rooms, do activity boards. It's an incredible world out there. So I'd say in every aspect.
And hopefully some of those products are starting to improve their accessibility as well. I know we've done some testing with Andrew on Easy Retro. Easy Retro is probably one of the few. They are. Easy Retro is pretty good, so check it out. It's quite a good tool. It has pretty good HTML structure, and they're open to learning as well, which is great. We give them feedback. What about you, Dax? What do you think has changed so much in the world of accessibility training?
Well, I think what's interesting is, as Russ was mentioning that, all I was thinking about is I've been in so many Teams calls where we're using this mood board, all these, I don't even know what it's called, but the little sticky notes and all this stuff, and none of it's accessible, right? And so it's like, okay, great, yes, but I think it's the elephant in the room that someone who is blind, has a vision disability, it is very hard for that person to do document accessibility. The platform itself is just not accessible. The way that code, how do you know what's not there if you can't see that it's not there? And I would really love to see someone develop a product that would allow for that. Hey, here's the tag. Is there something visual on the page to give an error? That would help someone who is blind be able to do the work, to do accessibility. Because I get emails at least once a month from someone who is blind saying, I'd love to get into document accessibility. Can you tell me how? And my answer is, well, you could be a tester, you could record your user experience, but beyond that, really not. So I think where I'd like to see training go is I'd like to see more focus on inclusion for people with disabilities, nothing about us without us, right? And seeing that platform grow. But from what has changed over time, I think it's just more training. Like there's more organizations out there providing more training, more in depth, a better understanding of the rules and how to apply them in certain situations, rather than keeping all this stuff kind of close to our chest. And we can make your content or accessible, but we're not necessarily ready to teach you how to do it yet. So
yeah. And look, I think that's where we know that there's this amazing amount of training, accessibility training. We need to get it into our curriculums, into our education systems and things like that, so that people are learning the basics again a lot early. You know, someone's doing a PowerPoint in year 7 on their, you know, their project, and they don't even know, you know, accessible PowerPoints have got these blaring colors, you know, so teaching it earlier. That's true. Gian, what do you think? What do you think's changed over the years?
So definitely, I would say developer knowledge has significantly reduced. Maybe developer knowledge about accessibility has significantly reduced over the years. Yeah, and I mean, we're really at the beginning of learning how to do online training. It is something that's, you know, it's like when DVDs first came out and every man and his dog had a different way of, you know, showing where the menu was and what features were and all that kind of stuff. And then it became kind of consistent. And the same thing with, you know, the internet. You know, every man and his dog had a certain way of just throwing information, you know, on a site. And now we have a consistent standard of, you know, like headers and left-hand or top navigation and footers and things like that. Yeah. I think the thing is with online training, we are really at the beginning. So we're learning what we can do and what we can do differently, but the products are changing significantly. So Zoom updated just recently, and you can now take over someone's computer, and, you know, do things in a way that, you know, it's not something that you could have done if you were face-to-face learning. You couldn't do that and show everyone. So I think it's sort of early days, and we don't really know, you know, what we don't know. We don't know where things are going. And I think we will find that at the moment, I feel that online training is sort of lesser than face-to-face training. I feel like people lose more information in online training than face-to-face, literally probably just because with face-to-face they're locked in a room. But then having said that, I felt that when, you know, people started bringing laptops into training sessions, you know, you'd lose them to doing emails and things like that. So I think at the moment, I feel like you can't impart the same amount of knowledge, or the trainees don't take in the same amount of knowledge than if you're in face-to-face. But I think that will change as we learn better how to use the technology and as the technology improves. So things like this AI companion, Read AI, one of our clients always has it on in the meetings, and it sends a kind of like overview of the meeting. And sometimes it's really off and sometimes it's really spot on. And so, you know, these things will improve, and all of a sudden you don't have to have a minute taker, or you don't have to, you know, go back and watch the videos to figure out what the actions are and things like that. So I think that it's a brave new world when it comes to online training.
No, exactly right. Look, this is it's been a wonderful session. Thank you so much again. It's just flown past. Really cannot thank you enough, Russ, Dax, and Gian, for joining us today. I'm going to just give a quick rundown. We've got some upcoming events. We've got Get Online Week for October. We've got Ricky moderating that, and we've got some wonderful videos of people using mobiles with their assistive tech. To show, just to get people started on how to use your mobile and set up for accessibility. So keep an eye out for that one, and some wonderful Ask Professionals coming up in November and December. We'd love to hear more about your topics. We'd like to keep the discussion going, so please join OZeWAI We're looking at ways to actually, we do have a forum, but we're looking at ways to actually have members engage a lot more and keep these discussions going. Join OZeWAI, volunteer if you can. We're a not-for-profit, we volunteer, you give back to the community. We love running these events. We'd love to do more in person. We're supporting local meetups. We've got a call where we want to actually support more meetups locally, so get back to the face-to-face. Yeah, just check out some of the resources that OZeWAI has on the website. I also like to thank Ricky, who's on the call. He does an amazing job on the website content as well, and the newsletter. We have a lot of stuff in our newsletter. But look, thank you everyone for joining us today, and keep an eye out for the recording and share with your friends and colleagues to learn more about digital accessibility. Thank you, everyone.